Hey guys, Thrasher here, and it's October. That means it's time for a new tier list. Let's talk about it right now. Okay, so first up, before we jump into the tier list itself, I just want to say that there are a ridiculous amount of sparking characters at this point. It's gotten so large that I actually have to split it into 3 different sheets now. We no longer have the bottom tiers and the top tiers. We now have a bottom tier, we have a mid tier, and then we have a top tier. And essentially the way it works is the bottom tier will be ranks D and C, and those are going to be the characters that are essentially on deck for balance changes, and we'll explain it a little bit more as we get into it. But I just want to say thank you to everyone that's helped with this tier list, as well as Bebop specifically. I needed a fair amount of help on this because there's just so many characters, it's hard to actually organize all of them at this point. The very top is reasonably easy, but anything after the top 5 or 6 characters, it's just so hard to remember to move every single character that needs to get moved. So just a big thank you to everyone that helped, and I will have a link to Bebop's channel down below as he did help a lot. So let's move into the actual tier list now. Okay, first up in the tier list is the D tier characters. One thing to mention here is all characters in all tiers are placed arbitrarily, so it's not from left to right, best to worst. It's anyone in the D tier is equivalent to anyone else in the D tier, anyone in the C tier is equivalent to anyone else in the C tier, and that's because even though there may be small differences if you look at the characters one by one, most of them have about the same impact in the meta within a single tier, so we don't place them one by one because that's not really a good way to think about it, and we can explain that a little bit more as we get to the top tier characters, some of the Z tier characters, where you might see a character that is better than other characters, but he's not on the best team, and that's because he has a ton of impact, not because he's necessarily better than one other unit. So let's talk about these D tier characters. These are characters that are up on deck for balance changes. They are the highest probability to actually get changes. There are other characters in the C tier which are pretty much just as bad, but the probability of them actually getting balance changes in the future are not as high as these characters because these ones are very, very underwhelming and they are never used. So let's move into the C tier and talk about those a little bit. These are similar to the D tier. As we said, they all also need balance changes. Their kits are not amazing in most cases. They've just been extremely power crept. The only real difference between C tier characters and D tier characters is the D tier characters are used even less often than the C tier, so they're probably going to get a balance change before the C tier characters. So let's move into the mid tier. First up will be the B tier. B tier characters are extremely underwhelming in most cases. They do need balance changes, but they probably won't get them because you could technically use them in PvP at this point. So you will see some B tier characters on very, very rare occasions. These are generally characters that are just filling spots for newer players that for whatever reason they don't have a better character that's in the A tier or higher. Unfortunately for a lot of these characters, I think they're going to get continually power crept for a very long time, as generally when we get balance changes, it's only for 5 characters at a time, and there are many characters below them on this tier list. So let's move into the A tier. Okay, A tier characters are the true middle of the tier list. These are generally where you're going to find most of your characters overall. These are all usable in PvP, but in 99% of the cases they are not optimal. Many of these characters do have good kits, but in most cases they just don't have the damage potential they used to have, or they sit on a team that's no longer really PvP viable, so they unfortunately don't really have a part to play in the meta at the moment, and because of that they don't have a big impact in the meta, and that's why they sit in the A tier. So let's move into the S tier. Okay, S tier characters are generally the characters that once you figured out what your team is based on and you've actually started to build them out, these are sort of your filler units. They do have a general impact in the meta and you will see them fairly often, but they are not the primary unit that you're scared of or that your general battle strategy is based around countering when you're actually fighting your opponent. These characters do have good damage potential, they generally have very good kits, but they're not the character that's going to absolutely decimate your team. So let's move into the S plus tier. S plus tier characters are generally quality support characters that have very good damage potential in most cases, with excellent kits that can truly support whoever your monster is on whatever team you're running at the time. A good example of this is the Android Super 17. Now, while I thought when he first came out he was going to be an absolute monster, I got to play with him a little bit, and along with one other character, he can make 2 teams very, very strong, but he by himself is a little underwhelming. I was hoping he would do a little more damage. I was hoping his kit wouldn't be quite as circumstantial as it is, and some people could even argue that you should put him in the last spot on the Z tier. I should add an extra spot for that and throw him there, but at the moment I think S plus tier makes sense, and in talking with Bebop he sort of felt the same thing, that he should be moved out of Z tier and into the S plus tier, so I agree with that. And then the other thing that you're going to notice here is there are 3 very powerful female warrior characters in the S plus tier, and that has actually made a big change to the Z tier. So as we jump into that, I'll be able to talk about that a little more. So let's talk about the actual Z-tier characters. In 7th place is Fusion Android 13. When you run him along with Super 17, you have an extremely powerful duo as far as cover changes go. This guy can obviously cover change in and stop any type of strike attack. Super 17 can cover change in and stop any type of blast attack. And then your third option, whether you're running an Android team and you're running the Yellow Cell, or you're running a Fusion team and you're running Super Vegeto, that also has some other type of cover change mechanic to it. So running those two characters together, you have a couple options that make your team very, very hard to combo on. It's absolutely amazing. This unit has a ton of damage potential, especially on an Android team, and he's extremely tanky, especially with the fact that if you use his main ability, he can heal, and he draws an Ultimate Arts card that can do a ton of damage in itself. So let's move on to number 6. Brienne. She had fallen pretty far. I believe she was down in the S tier before the new female warriors rolled around, but she came storming back with a vengeance. She has extreme damage potential. She's an absolutely phenomenal anchor unit, and with the addition of Kakunsa, Rosie, and the Dragon Ball Super version of Android 18, she is now an absolute monster once again. You have multiple units that can buff her up extremely well. They're very powerful support units. She already had very good damage potential, and between this unit, the Android 18, and Rosie, the female warrior team is immensely hard to deal with. She's also fairly tanky in that every time she enters the battlefield, she does get damage reduction by, I believe, 30% for 15 counts. And then if you use her main ability, she does draw an Ultimate Arts card, which does a fair amount of damage as well, beyond what she will be doing when she is essentially your last man standing with her Crisis Kit. So let's move into number 5. Perfect Cell. This card has eluded me for a long time. I've been trying to get him, but for whatever reason, I just cannot pull him. He's an absolutely phenomenal unit. He's been around for a very long time, and he's been near the top of the meta the entire time, which is quite a feat in itself. I think he's actually been up in the Z tier longer than probably even Purple Broly was. Now, Purple Broly sat at the very top for a longer period of time for sure, but I think he's remained relevant for probably the longest period of time of any character, other than maybe one other character who we'll talk about very soon. So let's just talk about the fact that this is a character that has a cover change rescue, which can stop a Rising Rush, which is extremely powerful. He still has very good damage potential, especially for how long he's been out. He has an Ultimate Arts card that does a very good amount of damage when you use his main ability. He seals one of your opponent's cards when he comes into the battlefield. He's a very hard opponent to deal with, and he has an absolutely phenomenal team. Some might even say it's the best team right now when you're running him with Fusion 13 and Super 17. That team is absolutely insane with all of their cover changes and cover rescues. It's crazy. So let's go ahead and talk about number 4. Full Power Frieza. This is the character that makes the Lineage of Evil team still extremely formidable. It's definitely one of the top 4 teams. Some might even say still the top team in the meta. But this character is absolutely phenomenal. He's got a cover damage reduction by 50%. It does wonders to increase your team's survivability. Beyond that, if you move him in and someone uses a Rising Rush, he survives the Rising Rush with his ability to restore his own health back to 20% when his health goes down to 0 for the first time. Also beyond that, if you cover change him in, your opponent loses 35 ki. When he enters the battlefield, you get 50 ki back, and it increases his damage, and you reduce the cost of your special move for, I believe, 10 timer counts. So he really has the ability to quickly jump in, stop whatever damage was coming your way, and then quickly pump some damage out before switching off to another character. Beyond that, if you use his main ability, it does bring in another special move for him to use, and his special move does do a ton of damage. Beyond that, his green card can stop most opponents' long-range attacks. If you combo his green card into a blue card, you can not only stop that attack, you can then do a ton of damage to your opponent. So let's move on to number 3. The legendary finish transforming Super Saiyan Goku. This character is very powerful and has great damage potential once he transforms. One of the great things about this character is once he's transformed, if both of your allies die, he does get a 50% health increase, so he gets a nice heal when you go into the crisis state. Beyond that, he gets minus 15 to his special move cost, which it's one of the best special moves in the game in that it can counter most opponents' attacks, and it can nullify your opponent's ability to restore their health if it goes down to 0. A good example of that is Frieza, who if you Rising Rush him, his health will go to 0 and he'll get 20% health back. If you use the special move of this Goku to get Frieza down to 0, he's not going to heal, he's going to die. That's absolutely amazing, especially since one of the core mechanics of the Lineage of Evil team right now is using that Frieza to sponge up a Rising Rush. Beyond that, he is a build-up character, so if you leave him out in combat longer, the longer he's out there, the more damage he's going to do. I believe it caps out at plus 70% at, I think, 10 timer counts. His blast damage is going to be absolutely insane as he is a blast-based unit. So he is a very good anchor unit who can do a ton of damage. He heals himself when he goes into that crisis state, and he has great synergy with the next character on our list. So let's talk about number 2. father-son Kamehameha Gohan. So this is the Super Saiyan 2 Gohan from the Cell series. This Gohan has been near the top of the Z tier list for as long as the Cell that we talked about earlier. Those are the two characters that have been up here for probably the longest period of time. They're absolutely insane. This guy has ridiculous damage potential. He is reasonably tanky, especially because he has cover change damage reduction. He heals when you use his main ability. He has an ultimate arts card that you draw, and if you happen to run him with the legendary finish Goku, who we are talking about, or any other Goku, and that Goku dies, the ultimate arts card from this character is absolutely going to delete whatever opponent it hits. Beyond that, every time you use a Blast Arts card with this character, he's going to get increased blast damage, so if you have longer combos, you can really put a hurt on an opponent. Beyond that, he does have other Crisis Kit abilities, so if you have multiple allies that are downed, he does get an increase to his ki recovery and his damage, fairly similar to the way Goku gets an increase to damage, which is very nice, because if you run both those characters on one team, that means you have two options for sort of your crisis-based character, depending on what you need to do at the time, so it makes the team a lot more flexible. These two characters together are very powerful, so let's move into number one. Super Vegeto. Now, some people might argue that the Android team is the best team in the meta right now. Some people might say Lineage of Evil. Some might even say Fusions. It really depends on who you ask. But this character absolutely has the biggest impact in the meta still. He's an absolutely insane unit that gets buffs for 1,000,001 reasons. He has a way to reduce damage to himself. He has an absolutely insane team if you run him with the other two fusion androids, 13 and 17. Essentially, the way it works is if you try to do damage to any of those three characters, as soon as you start your combo, you just have to know what attack your opponent's about to use, and then you switch into a different character and you can almost always stop it. So a good example of that is if an opponent is coming at you, they start a combo, and then they want to use a strike attack, for example, you would either switch in this Super Vegeto, or you would switch in the Fusion 13, and that's going to stop the combo right there. If they're going to use a blast attack, you switch in the Super 17, that's going to stop the attack right there. So that team of three characters is extremely defensive, and this character already has a ton of offensive potential. Beyond that, when you use his main ability, he draws an ultimate arts card, which does a ton of damage to opponents, plus you can do a legendary finish, which looks absolutely amazing. He heals, you get ki back, this all comes from his main ability. That's insane. And furthermore, his main ability also increases his arts card draw speed for a short period of time, which is great. Beyond that, every time he enters the battlefield, he does get a damage buff for a fairly short period of time. I want to say it's 15 counts, maybe 20, and every time he draws a card, he gets increased damage for whatever type that is. So if he draws a strike card, he gets a buff to his strike damage. If he draws a blast card, he gets a buff to his blast damage. Outside of that, if your opponent uses an arts card of any kind, he's also going to get another buff to his damage, which I believe is 10% for every arts card used. And this is a small thing because regeneration isn't really used at the moment, but he does get a reasonably sized regeneration damage buff. I think that's going to actually factor in more in a couple weeks, because it looks like we're probably going to be getting some new regeneration characters. Spoiler alert. But overall, I think this character has a lot of longevity, and while he may not sit on top of the meta forever, I think he's going to be in the Z tier for quite a while to come. So that's where the tier list sits right now. Let me know what you guys think as far as where characters should be moved. Who do you think was right? Who do you think was wrong? Who do you think's undervalued? Who's overvalued? And if you guys like this content, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.